everybody. It's so fun. I love this part the best. Great to see everyone. Lots and lots of familiar faces. So we're here today with Sean Inderbitzen. We're going to start the way we always start, with just coming into the body, and we'll do a nice kind of practice. And then Sean and I are going to spend some time together, and then we'll all come back to you and have some great interaction like we always do. Okay, so settling. You might want to stand up, just check and ask your body what feels right for you right in this moment as we begin to come together and make this beautiful community that we have over the next hour. And then just slowing things down a little bit and checking to see what feels right for you in your body right in this moment. How slow does it feel okay to be? And just, you might start by just noticing around the room, pausing. And then if it feels okay, you could soften your gaze. And then slowly turning your attention somewhere down into the center of your body, if that's okay for you in this moment. It doesn't have to be. And just saying hello, a friendly hello inside you. And if you have a sense of where you are in your nervous system right now, you could really just notice that. And you might just invite a gentle little connecting, showing yourself some compassion. And we want to make a space where every person, every kind of being is welcomed here today, right in this moment. We're all welcomed here. Each and every person is welcomed in the group to make safety together, to explore with our guest, Sean. So maybe a nice breath, feeling some sense of grounding inside, if that's there for you, grounding with the group, co-regulating together, and then slowly beginning to come back to your room and back into our group together. And maybe looking around to see everybody, people that you know, and some new people that you don't know. Hello, everyone. Yeah. So I'm going to hang out with Sean for a while. Sean and I don't actually know each other, do we?
No, we do not.
No.
New to each other.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello. It's so
Thank
lovely to
you.
finally actually get to connect and do this with you.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Yeah. And you've just written a new book and it's just come out, and me too. So here we are.
Yeah, we are like really doing it up like we're the real thing or
Yeah.
something, whatever
And
that means, right? Like,
both published with Norton, and Steve wrote both of our forewords for our books. So he's been busy too.
so, and you just released another book too, didn't you, on somatic therapies
Oh, the chapter. Yeah,
and
that's
the SSP. I feel like you just
yes.
dropped two books now that I think about it.
Yeah, but just chapter and a practice.
Okay.
The somatic psychotherapy book, do I have that handy?
That new
It's,
one.
yeah, that has like something like 32 authors in it. Yeah, it's a wonderful book for people who are curious about what's going on in somatic therapy these days, and there's a lot going on, right? Yeah,
There's so
yeah.
much going on.
So you trained, right, as a sensory motor psychotherapist?
I did. I trained and I'm certified in sensory motor psychotherapy. I did all three levels. So I did the dreaded level three, as people refer to it so like lovingly, but it was really hard and really worth it, I would say.
Mm.
Did you do SP?
No,
Did you
I
do?
trained as a focusing oriented therapist with
Okay.
Eugene Gendlin. That's my
Oh, sure.
history. Yeah.
Well, that's so lovely. I'm so ignorant. I did a little reading and so, but like there's like a whole world over there.
It's a
Sure.
whole world. Yeah, just like Pat Ogden's world. Yeah. Yeah. When did you do that training?
Actually just finished last fall.
Okay.
So I started in 2019 and
Mhm.
then it took me till fall 2024. How
That's,
about you? When did you do yours?
oh God.
Too long ago?
Oh,
Okay.
a long, long, long time ago, like 30 years ago, I started training with Gendlin. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
love the traditional nature of this field. Like so I come out of a religious world and I still have my own faith tradition, but it's less religious. But there's so much overlap in that there are these schools of thought and these figures and these
Yeah.
magical.
So tell me, just share about yourself. I don't really know you, so I'm curious, like, how did you get into writing this book, and what do you do with yourself over the
Sure.
years?
What do I do with myself over the years? So I live in Wisconsin, which is in the middle of the United States, and it's north, about same latitude as New Hampshire. So it's cold. So I like to think of it as a wet and a dry season. I don't know that everyone here would refer to it that way, but we have a snow season and then we have a scalding hot season.
That's
So
like
right now,
I'm in
what
Toronto. It's the same.
is it?
Yeah,
Okay, that
snow
makes
season
sense.
and then a hot season. Lots of, yeah, like real variety. I think it shapes our bodies, right?
It really does. This time of year, I go for runs a lot. This year, I've been golfing an odd amount, which is not something I usually do, but I've just been really into golfing. And so I do sensory motor psychotherapy, and I work in a generalist mental health framing. So I'll run and I'll do golf till probably October when it turns to the cold season. And then we'll start hot yoga for the next 6 months. And so
Mm.
it's like 6 months of warm, 6 months of colds. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I got to writing this book because I got involved with sensory motor psychotherapy because I work in community mental health. For those of you not familiar, you have a pretty broad audience from all over the globe, right? Am I
Yeah, we
correct in
do.
understanding
Yeah, we're
that?
from all
Okay.
over the world. Yeah.
Oh, so a little context, community mental health in the United States is the federal government subsidizes our poorest of the poor and the treatment of them. And actually they changed the payer mix with a model called the federally qualified community health center model. About 50, 60, 70 years old now. It came out in not the Great New Deal. It was post that. I want to say it was Lyndon B. Johnson years actually, is when this program was started. So I work for an agency that essentially gets a better reimbursement rate for Medicaid. And so I don't get to choose who I treat.
Yeah.
Um, so whoever walks through the door walks through the door. And so I took Pat Ogden's training because everybody was doing EMDR in the clinic I worked at the time. I do sensory motor psychotherapy as sort of a training, like I needed something to work with trauma. And so the body and the Hakomi method kind of pointed me to Pat. And
Yeah.
so I took her training and I did level one. And then it's like, okay, we did the single incident. Now we need the developmental. And then you get that. Then I got familiar with Steve's work because I have autism, live with autism. I've done research on autism with Mayo Clinic. Just cause, right? Like kicks and giggles. When I did my doctorate at Tulane, I was really into understanding how do I build something to treat and help people like me. And so sensory motor psychotherapy, Pat and Steve have this old friendship. Pat is
Yeah.
creator of sensory motor psychotherapy, and we all know who Steve is. Um, And so they have this long-standing friendship. So his work really percolates into her traditions.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got exposed to it. And then I started tinkering, right? Because that's what my brain does, is I'm very thing Steve often says to me is, Sean, get out of your head. Your cortex is getting in the way. And so, but like my cortex sometimes can be very useful, and like started seeing autism through the lens of polyvagal theory in the body. And so then got to know Steve through a friend of a friend. And Steve, for whatever reason, was like, yeah, I'll write a paper with you. And so we never actually wrote the paper, but then we wrote a book together. And he just one day, it was funny. I was like looking at publishers, was like, I'll do your forward in I think 2022. I got rejected by Temple Grandin's publishing arm. And then he was like, I was like, I don't need the book. I'm done. Like, whatever. And he's like, let me just introduce you to my editor. I'm like,
Oh,
the one at Norton? Like, I'm like thinking this will be like the thing I do at the end of my career. And he's like, yeah. So
yeah.
Steve and his ever kind nature kind
Yeah.
of
That's
made the
true.
book happen.
Yeah, he does that.
He
So
does.
tell us about how you understand autism
Sure.
in
So
through a
I understand.
polyvagal lens.
So I understand autism in a way that some people might find really offensive. And I just say that as a caveat because not everybody agrees with me, and there's lots of models of autism and what causes it and what doesn't. I see it a lot like an adjustment disorder or depression that's just very sticky. And so when the nervous system becomes stuck, right, and very like withdrawn, right, chronically, like there are biological and there are genetic factors that might contribute to that. And so a lot of things can look like autism, not be autism, but we call it autism, right? And so, like, I understand autism through my life as some points in life is more autistic than others, right? So, as a younger man, right? So, like, I was in a car wreck and got pretty stuck and left the scene of the accident, and my flight, my sympathetic activation took right over, right? And I became pretty stuck, like, oh my God, right? And then I'm like at high school and I'm like with my buddies, like, I feel like I should have. So I did this thing, and they're like, what'd you do? Like, oh, I hit a car and I left. And they're like, say what? That say what was like kind of a cue of like, hey, there's probably a piece you missed, Sean, right? But that was also that dorsal, that dampening social engagement system. So my nervous system looked very autistic in that moment. I called the police, I turned myself in. We did a juvenile, or I wasn't a juvenile, I had a court justice diversionary program, and we got it out that way. But like definitely was
That's
really stuck and in freeze for a while there. And now like I'm older and I'm more connected to my body and my feelings and who I am and my parts. And I don't see it that way. I think flexibility is a beautiful thing that can be cultivated, grown, and developed, as well as like emotional depth and empathy. It's funny because like we actually stopped teaching empathy in grad school and counseling programs, and like doesn't like there's how many trauma modalities, but like there's so few programs on empathy, and yet it is such a core skill, and we take it for granted, I think, as a
mm.
field. But that's just
When
me.
you say that it's kind of your take on it is controversial, this idea of the nervous system getting stuck in sort of dysregulated states, right? We would see that in kind of a trauma lens in my model. And that's not the way everybody sees it. So can you share a little bit about how do other people, what are other people's
Yeah,
ideas?
your question is, I just tell me if I've got it right, is how do other people see it? And
Well,
I'll just
I think that's always so interesting when we have something that's happening and there's all these different ways of understanding it. And one of the things I really like doing is thinking about all those different ways and
sure.
welcoming them so that we can bring them in and play with them, right? And not get stuck in any one, even my own favorite.
Well, so I think you have to go back in the history of psychology to really understand it. As weird as that might sound, Freud has a huge impact on Western psychology. And
So,
so Freud and Erik Erikson, who also Norton holds the titles to, just saying, right, both conceived of identity as the singular ego state, like this thing, which we now know there's multiple ego states, right? So that finding of there's multiple ego states and structural dissociation in Pierre Genet's work really has not made its way into the field of applied behavioral analysis, right? Which is sort of like the main hub for where autism treatment emerged. So you have to understand that ABA, applied behavioral analysis, is
Right,
this
right.
umbrella term. It's
Yeah.
not like one thing, like often gets mischaracterized as, but there's like hundreds of different kinds of ABA. So they make their way up through the 80s, the 90s, and in the early 2000s, people who did cognitive behavioral therapy really started rebelling against this ABA thing until Valerie Gauss comes along in like 07, 08 with Guilford Press and does a book on cognitive behavioral therapy for autistic adults. At that time, it was Asperger's. And so for 10 years, right? So another decade has to pass before there's this real zeitgeist moment in cognitive behavioral therapy where everybody starts talking about autism, right? So you have people like Devin Price emerging. But really, again, this structural dissociation thing has not made its way into this offshoot that has become very connected in lots of places because people are super connected to autism, but also like they really don't understand trauma. They don't understand how we look at the universe in a trauma lens. Like the theories that underlie and come from, say, Pierre Genet and structural dissociation theory in the 1890s have not percolated. And so there's all this disconnection. So people take autism and say, I am autistic. This is lifelong and enduring. So they're hearing from Social Security and Medicaid that they have this thing forever and doctors. And yet, like, we don't understand identity the way they understand identity. And so there's all these disparate sort of views that kind of can like make it look like it's lifelong, enduring, and can't change, which to me is just too hopeless of a position to take.
So
Because
you have a real strength-based model. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
for me, it's about the hope and optimism that life can be better and improve, and I can become more flexible and change. Or if I need to not change, I can do that too. And so I refuse to accept the notion that, and maybe it's offensive to some people, I think that like, hey, it's okay to like have autism change over time because the conditions of your life change. If you look at the woman who designed the gold standard tool, the ADOS 2, which is the Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale, and you look at her longitudinal data, people over that longitudinal, like 30, 40-year study, their conditions change. They're diagnosable and then they're not. Like, it's not so black and white.
Mm.
It's a thing we've tried to name with the DSM, which again, I think brings us back to polyvagal theory, which is really there are better, more useful ways to think about this that don't involve stigmatizing or labeling a person. But as Pat would say, like there's an advantage to identifying yourself with just one word. Like there must be some advantage for that group of people to being autistic forever.
Mm. So could you talk about, do you agree that there are adaptive features to
Yeah, I think
autism?
it's just,
And
yeah.
tell me about them.
I mean, I think, right, people have amazing capacities. Like Elon Musk, prior to his Doge thing, right, like was really great at Tesla. Tesla is like one of the few car companies that has united the entire country in buyership, right? It crosses all political dynamics now. Like it's an amazing car, despite how terrible these last few months have been for people because of his impact. I mean, you look at the skill, though, that it takes to create a car that can unify an entire country. Like Ford hasn't been able to do it in 100 years. And they make trucks, and like that's a thing everybody theoretically drives. But like, I mean, you have these amazing cars that are actually saving the planet, and like it makes sense to drive, and their stock value is super high still, like even with all the stuff he's been doing. And so when I think about autism, I think people have these amazing capacities if they have the right supports. And like clearly, I mean, if you've made a lot of money, you had to have some right supports somewhere along the line.
So can we break those down a little bit more, those adaptive features? So
Sure.
what is that about the Tesla, or what's under that? Is it
So under that
creativity,
would be like a real attention to detail, a real
attention to
structure, a real
detail?
rigidity. right? A rigidity that is geared towards employment is geared towards building, creating, which means you have to have online some ventral vagus nervous system. You have to have some safety to be creative. Not that that is necessarily being extrapolated to everyone else, but right, like, is this very powerful way of like using this incredible attention to detail to innovate and create and make a thing that could actually save the planet in some way and reduce our carbon footprint in a really meaningful way. So when my kids, right, become adults,
Yeah.
then they actually still have a planet left.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what about the relationship with attention deficit? Do you see an overlap there in terms of adaptive features as well as some?
I mean, I think things are adaptive until they're not, right? Like being highly like in your attention can be really great if you're trying to take in a whole bunch of information and search for threat. But if you need to focus to write a book, like I just had this question from somebody, they were like, I can't ever get this done. I feel like I'll never write my book. And they're writing like a nervous system like approach to neurodiversity. And it's like, give yourself the time, right? Because you actually need the time to allow the attention to go everything where, because there's no such thing as a tangent. It's just sometimes the mind needs to ping pong longer than other people's, and that can be disruptive, especially if you're trying to get your kid to school and they're just, because they're just meandering. My son does this all the time. It's
Hmm.
so I think it just depends on context, right? Like,
Yes, yeah, yeah. Context is everything in some ways, right? In terms of the paradigm shift and then how we understand things to be. I do a lot of work in addiction and with dissociation, and we're really seeing the adaptive features of those addictive states when there's so much threat, right?
right. And it's amazing how helpful that is in
Yeah.
that context, right? But when it comes to like, I'm assuming moving to stopping, right? When I need to be present, to be a parent, right? Like I had this conversation with a client this morning who used to be an addict, left addiction, and I don't know what the proper term for that is. There's so many, and I'm not a specialist in addictions in any way. But like part of her parenting journey in parenting a kid with like a very defiant sort of teenage attitude, which is not a mental health condition, it's just being a teenager, right? Is like there's this tendency to just go, whatever, right? Not very helpful at that time. But like also, right, needs to be able to become present, to slow down, to
Yeah.
not react so harshly, to deliver consequences that are meaningful and soon enough that they actually build a connection between, hey, we need to do more of this and less of that, right? Because parenting's that kind of journey and it takes presence.
It sure does. Presence really is what it's all about, right?
Totally. It's mind blowing how much of
And
all of this comes back to that. I
yeah.
take it you do a lot of that in your work with the piece of
Yeah.
presence.
Yes, and I love this term, Mary Hendricks Janlin. She was also very much involved in the focusing community, and she coined this term, the revolutionary pause. And she said, if everyone paused every day as a practice, it would change the world.
Well, and it's amazing, like, to think how that plays out in neurodiversity and parenting when you talk about executive functioning. Like this mother, it's really interesting. This mother goes super fast, and the daughter is just kind of meandering, like, oh my God, like very distracted. And so the parenting move for her is really about learning to be present, slowing down,
Yeah.
so that her nervous system can actually just be, as you said, the revolutionary pause. Like that is the parenting intervention. That is the I'm going to be here for you and hold you and be present.
Yeah. 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 So do you find yourself doing that with parents? Yeah, I guess you're doing a lot of family work.
I do family work with anybody under 13, and then I do adults and teenagers. And so I do a lot of the adults and teenagers. So I do a lot of sensory motor psychotherapy. And then I get a lot of really strange cases because in community health, there's nobody who like, there's not a neurologist for 100 miles. So like you pick up stuff. So I assess for autism as part of my gig. We do it as like we just take the hit to cost because it's just good practice, and there's like 6 months wait list to get tested. And so kids aren't getting services they need. So I do, like, I'm very involved in that world, but sort of removed. But so I do a lot of that kind of thing. And really, but I get a lot of these interesting neurology cases where there's an
Hmm.
adult on the spectrum, but they also have epilepsy
Oh,
and dissociation, and
yeah,
there's sexual assaults, and they're the assaulter, or right, of something horrific,
yeah.
or they're an arsonist or whatever, right? So it's really kind of been interesting how it just kind of just shows up in waves, right? Like there was a wave of high school boys where I had to learn how to say, "You guys stink. What's up with like not showering? What's that about?" And so like, which takes you to other interesting places you never thought you'd go.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of that. It's wonderful. So I can't believe we're already just past 30 minutes. It goes fast. It's a little
It's,
window in and then back out. So let's, Lisa, shall we go to our folks? Because Mina's already got her hand up. Mina, hello, hello.
Oh,
Is that some kind of fabric?
yes, this is actually, I'm into phoenixes and dragons. I need maximum protection and inspiration to rise up again from burning fire.
Okay. All right. What's your question?
Well, I am just so thrilled to have this book, which I just got, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But I've glanced through it, and I have so many questions for you, but I'll just ask one. So I'm an neurointegrative learning specialist, and I work with very young children as well as adults, just because we carry our little child who has unmet needs with us through adulthood, right? Um, so the students I find have so many of my students are global, they have global delays. One family had 4 children, all of them on the spectrum. And so, so when they get evaluated, of course they're going to get really lousy scores because they're already defensive, in defense, adaptive adaptations. And then there's complete stranger asks them all these questions and asks them to talk when they can't talk and they can't think and they're nervous. And I find that one of the things that really gets overlooked is the sensory motor piece. So the fact that you're doing sensory motor therapy is fascinating to me, and I'd like to connect with you. Maybe I can get some training from you. But I believe that teachers need to be a little bit more like general practitioners. We can't just afford to do the top-down cognitive teaching. We really need to have a broader understanding. So could you please just tell us a little, like if you were coaching a teacher, what would you
sure.
tell the teacher to do in her classroom?
Hmm.
Well, I tend to think all nervous systems are different. And sensory profiles are too, right? I think people that are not autistic look autistic. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, and Steve hasn't published it yet, but that like sensory sensitivities causes all kinds of dysregulation, just like ACEs do. They're not the same thing, but there are lots of variables in the body that give rise to sympathetic and dorsal activation. So if I were working with a teacher, one of the things I'd probably do is what I call an orienting exercise, because I really believe in sort of assessing where people are at. And so I pick 2 objects, one's a positive, one's a negative, and I have people kind of just go between those 2 things. And I probably have, let's say we're you and me, let's say you're the teacher, I'm just projecting here, so go with me on this, right? So I'd have you like pick the positive object and sort of feel into your body and sense into it, and then see the negative, because that's really doing 2 things, right? One, it's connecting you to grounding into your body. 2, it's giving me a sense of how much being in your body you can tolerate, because I am not of the mind that everyone can tolerate it. And so really, I think doing activities like that as a teacher, right, are really helpful if you can find the moments and find ways to assess and understand how in my body can my student be. Because like Jan was saying, being dissociated is real, or distracted, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, doesn't matter. Like, it really can be very adaptive. And so like, you don't want to push the thing too fast, but you also don't want to like not push it enough. And so it's this real, I think assessments really, as a social worker, where I try to have people start. Does that answer your question? I don't know if that's a
It does.
satisfying
And
answer.
of course, I have many, many more questions.
Sure.
If there is a dearth or a lull moment, could I just sneak in another question? Follow up.
Sure. The
There
other
is,
thing,
but at this point, we've got lots of people lined up there.
No
Mina.
problem. No
All
problem.
right.
the
Okay.
other thing
Thank
you can
you.
do is there's a booking feature on my Instagram profile. Go there, you can book an hour, 3 hours, half an hour, and just use that, and you can schedule through my Instagram link.
That's a lot of accessibility. Steve,
Yeah.
proud of you.
Can we have the info?
Sam, you're up.
I actually just finished your training with PESI UK last year. So I
Oh,
have my
shit.
Sean notes with me.
What? That's wild. That's
And
still,
I have
that
both.
never
I
gets
have
old.
Jan's book and I have your book. That's what I'm working on this year.
Yeah, we got a road show coming.
So I'll pick one question, which is when you're working with clients with high rigidity, really dorsal, I'm having a hard time with the buy-in to polyvagal, or I get, oh yeah, everybody else but not me. So I'm curious about when you're in those positions, how do you start to get little bits of
Absolutely.
buy-in?
I've got a client right now who's doing ketamine who has treatment-resistant depression and autism. So like, this is very familiar right now. He's in his mid-20s. He feels like life has passed him by. And so really the wisdom I got from Pat Ogden, and I can't take credit for this, is, and this is if this person is open to parts work, right? Is if they are, you can really explore the stuckness. You can use a probe like you're a blessing, not a burden, which really like is this very radical, like what kind of thing? Because there's this real belief that that isn't true. And so you get to know the stuckness as if it's real here and present now.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? I don't know if
It's
that's
a great
satisfactory.
answer, and it reminds me of some of Jean's prompts in stuck places. That's great. Thanks, Sean.
No problem. Good question.
Neil. Hi, Neil.
Hi. So I'm a developmental therapist, special educator. I've been working in the field for 25 years. I see such continued severe misdiagnosis. Now, what I find is developmental therapists, shockingly, go down a checklist, and they don't engage the child around what they're doing, how they're moving, allowing for the pause, allowing for the reciprocity beneath the words to form a bond, a reciprocal deepening attachment. So that's a big problem in the field. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I mean, I think you're an educator, right?
I mean, I'm an educator, but I'm addressing
Yeah, no, I know you're
educational,
addressing
I'm
a ton of
addressing
things, but
speech.
at a
Yeah,
licensure level, you're an educator, right?
yes, yes.
You guys are under so much stress, right? And so I think it's kind of a both and, right? There's
Oh,
the,
I should clarify. So no, I'm not an educator in a school system. I work in early intervention, and then I have a private practice. So I work directly with the families, with their child in the home,
okay.
using the DIR floor time
Oh, sure.
approach. Yeah.
That's helpful reframing. I thought you were in the school system.
No,
So I
no,
was going
no,
to speak to
no,
that.
no.
So you do, yeah. I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of like just. I think it's beyond autism. I think there's like, if you look at being in a capitalist
Absolutely.
society, what is productivity? Nothing but threat, right? It's
Right.
why people can't be creative. And so I think, as Jan talked about, the radical pause. I don't remember who that was, but like that's a revolutionary act. Like it's in the name, but truly, like you get all this kickback for stopping and saying no and having boundaries. And so I think, yeah, that's a super difficult place.
Yeah, and it's very terrifying for many because it's so systemic in terms of our nervous system. We have to do, we have to perform, and that hence the ABA methodologies are continue to be so popular because we're addressing surface behaviors. We're not getting beneath.
Well,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the role of privilege. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm terrible at that. Like, that's my superpower is therapeutic interrupting. But like the privilege of like the privilege that it takes to be able to not work. Like, I mean, like I'm 10 years into my career, and for the first time, I feel like I have enough time, and I only do therapy 3 days a week, and I do consulting too. And I had to like actually budget out and like be able to afford that. And like, because I have bills, I have cars, I have kids, like I have things I have to pay for. And so there's like a piece of like the way society is organized at a fundamental level, like does not support the radical pause. I think that's part of what makes it so radical.
Right, right. And just very quickly, the last part that I have, what I've found, and Steve has expressed this in conversation, is I have always found that sensory, whether it be tactile, visual, facial, even proprioceptive and vestibular, they reduce as we cultivate an autonomic nervous system that feels safe in engagement,
Yeah.
according to the particular
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, no, safety does amazing things.
So the sensory I see is being driven by the or at least being exacerbated by the
Yeah,
autonomic.
no, absolutely. I mean, society is not structured for people to feel safe.
Right, right.
It's a threat-based economy. Good question. Go ahead, Sandra.
Lisa, are there questions in the chat that you might take a look at?
Yeah, one question that did pop up is that if we could talk a little bit about some of the actual somatic exercises, speaking on that topic of safety with felt sense and how we can meld the two of those together with some somatic exercises that help anyone who's neurodiverse. You said that there's a spectrum to how those feel in everybody's body, but if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
Dan, do you want to speak to the felt sense part, and then I can speak to the neurodiversity piece?
Well, I think there are lots of exercises that I did on in my YouTube channel. Clearing space is one of them, and also in my book, the Felt Sense Polyvagal Grounding Practice is a kind of basic practice where we work on connecting in with the felt sense, the deeper levels of experiencing, and also our nervous system. So that's what I would refer people to. And Sean, yeah, share please what you.
Yeah, so I tend to pull on zones of proximal development by developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky from the 50s. And
Oh, wow, yeah.
I mean, you know this guy, but like he had this really useful framing of like, how do we scaffold that? So like I would take all of Jan's exercises, I'd probably just add one piece, which would be like really like a vocabulary of sensations, right? Because there's what I have found in the research I've done on sensory motor psychotherapy in autistic children when we've done that with some colleagues is that mindfulness sort of like bounces out, like it's almost like a leapfrog effect. And so like you have to build some tolerance for it. And
Yeah.
so really like giving people like what I find is the biggest struggle in that bounce is for my autistic clients who come in the first time to name those things. And so I think providing like, and it's in my book, it's in Pat Ogden and Janina Fisher's 2015 book. That's where I took it from. But providing just language around like, and really kind of being a little more like the word Pat Ogden would use, like taking over. It's not necessarily like you'd want to take over the experience, but you'd want to be there and be present enough with that, like it doesn't feel so overwhelming. Because if you can give language like, oh, is it that? Is it that? Is it that? Like it allows a menu of options, is what we'd say in a motivational interviewing world. But like giving that language really can root all of those exercises.
Beautiful. See, this is what's so great is when we connect in community like this, we can really bring in so many different things. And I think also, Sean, to help people, especially new people to the field, it can be overwhelming, right? There's so much information, and there's this kind of tendency to kind of think you have to go this way or that way or this. But really, the more avenues we have to help people, the better, right? And to really be working in collaboration. So I love that. I love this idea.
I love your stuff too. I really want to get more familiar with it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just did a workshop with a woman who's an OT, and it was really fascinating. I did the morning and she did the afternoon, and I thought, wow, we got to do more of this. Really.
Yeah, it's amazing how much blending there is and even just funding. Like there's a multi-million-dollar grant that the US federal government put out where OTs are going into school and delivering mental health interventions. So I think
OTs
really
are
OT
OTs are amazing.
complete.
We have Tracy Stackhouse who teaches at the
Yeah,
in the Polyvagal certificate, just like I do. I mean, her work is amazing. And there's, I think when we go to these places, the extremes in some ways of experiencing, right? It really teaches us so much about everything, the whole dimension of it. So, okay, Sandra. Sandra has her hand up. Hello, Sandra.
Hi, a chance to meet you in Dublin, and we could
Oh,
meet after all. I know we connected on one of these prior sessions, but I just want to say hi to Sean and ask you. So I identify as potentially autistic, but I'm old enough that I wasn't assessed. I had a lot of struggles with work and relationships and different things, and over the years I've found it helpful to have the context of being a highly sensitive person, uh, having complex PTSD, and having features of ADHD, and just sort of the stories I would create about myself being crazy or whatever, and now I have the context that, oh, okay, I have a highly sensitive nervous system, and that is, it's a benefit to the community for there to be individuals who will hear the predator coming quicker than anyone else. I have to build on those strengths and develop a routine to keep my nervous system as regulated as possible and not make up anything, because I don't know, I have my own 12-step journey and whatnot that's helped with that. But I guess the main question I wanted to ask was if you had any recommendations if somebody wanted to be assessed as an adult, what resources would you recommend? I worked in vocational rehabilitation professionally for decades. And I was told by a manager who had two autistic kids, why would you want to be assessed? Why would you want to be diagnosed? Don't go there. And so I just kind of, between being busy and needing to support my health with all kinds of things in addition to working 40 hours a week, I never got around to it. Now I'm retired and I'm like, would you recommend it? And what would be the resources you would recommend?
I can give two very immediate answers. Some of this is bigger than I can answer today. But I'm going to try to give you some answers. One, I think biology is really under-assessed and intervened in. I spend so much of my time with people just looking at things like sleep, eating, food sensitivity, that kind of thing, because all that can cause rise, like, are variables that get ruled out in studies, right? You pick a population when you study heart rate variability and you rule out things like there are 13 of these, right, that actually really begin, like, can give rise to an increased speed of your heart, right? And so whether you have autism or not is less important than the question as to what's giving rise to your sympathetic and dorsal activation. I think that is a much more fundamentally useful and important question, because diagnosis is just the thing we created to name a thing. It doesn't really do much. And so so the second piece to this is Norton will be producing, they're going to be launching their continuing ed arm here pretty soon. I have a course in there on assessment, and my frame is PMED, Polyvagal Theory, Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, Executive Functioning, and Diagnosis. And in there is a tool called the Inderbitzen Treatment Planning Inventory. It's also in some trainings I do. So if you did the PESI one, it may have been in there. I don't know if you said you just did that last one that I just did. They just had a symposium, so check with them that it's in. I know PVI and we have been talking about an autism course, and I'm going to use this. I just did it in Brazil. But my point is that it has 13 different variables you can look at that are common, because I think about things in a research lens. Like, being autistic really, for me, equates to two things: increased rigidity and a dampened social engagement system. So if you're having one of two or both of those things, it could be any number of underlying causes. And really what's more helpful is to work with what's creating the activation, whether it's sensory pathways or not sleeping or not eating or poverty, right? It's endless. There's so many variables, but if you can explore those, you generally get some movement and you can become more flexible and connect more deeply. Does that help?
That's really, yeah, that's in alignment with my experience that the label is less important than what's needed. And as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, it was always about building supports needed to help people to function in work or independence in the community. I like that we're moving away from that medical model now. Thanks.
Yeah, no, you absolutely can move away from the medical model. It's great.
Okay, so Sean, you're saying increased rigidity, and what was the second?
Dampen social engagement
Social
system.
engagement systems. So what I would love you to do is add some positives to that.
Well, there are positives, right? Like
I know. That's
rigid
what
can be really effective, but I've just been writing a treatment manual, so that's where my brain is with it.
I know, but I think when we really think about these adaptive features, we need to name them, because otherwise it's still kind of presenting it in ways that are and can be problematic. But there's so many ways in which the creative kind of thinking and the freshness of those ideas and the lack of rigidity, right? It's kind of paradoxical.
Yeah, no, and rigidity can be really helpful, but I think there's two sides to any experience. And like generally what I find when I try to be like all positive with people is they don't feel like I appreciate their suffering.
No, that's why I think we have to do both.
Yeah, it's just a question of how. And I think, right, like,
And I think it's not just with autism, it's with things, it's with many things,
everything.
right? It's with everything. Yeah.
Like we are much bigger question, but I love your strengths approach. I think one of the things about neural exercise is organicity, which is inherently the living wisdom of all systems, right? Like a stim can be a somatic resource, right? Like I do this, it's very helpful.
Yes, exactly.
So like the values really matter too. We didn't really get to those, but they make all the difference.
Yeah. Christian has a question.
Go ahead, Christian.
Hi.
Hi, Sean. I was very excited to be able to attend this today. I read your book and have heard you on Uniquely Human, the podcast, and it's really been a gateway for me in kind of moving to like understanding the nervous system of autistic folks and kind of shifting my view as a clinician. I'm also a social worker, and I'm working in Chicago, and so I've worked in a lot of contexts where, and I'm sure you can also attest to this, that the behaviorism and ABA is so common that it is part of like, I think a lot of families and individuals feel it to be a required part of them themselves and their children, like getting the supports they need. And many people have not been exposed to even mental health supports that really work to support them. And in reading your book, I really recognize that like this polyvagal theory really jives well with autistic folks, because we have a lot of trouble sometimes with doing the top-down processing. And so I really like that idea of using the neural exercises and more movement-based things. And so anyways, my question to you is, how do you start to shift that paradigm when you start to work with clients and families, that paradigm from behaviorism to one that's grounded in nervous system and trauma-informed care, and start somewhere with helping people to understand a new way of thinking about autism and neurodiversity?
Well, I think the answer to your question is twofold. One, what is the micro, and one, what is the macro? To borrow some terms from social work, micro being the individual practice, macro being the larger. I think the micro is understanding what kind of ABA they think that they've been exposed to or they've been demanded. Like discrete trial is very different than the Ruby. The Ruby is one of the most person-centered approaches. Or like G.I. Patterson, right? Like he was this guy who in 1975 wrote an entire chapter on we need to teach parents therapeutic warmth, right? A behaviorist, right? And so like tuning into who are those people. And so like I think whether you're doing ABA or not, you can use an autism model from a polyvagal lens, because I think you just introduce like the big thing I think that polyvagal in individual practice frees you up in is this idea of intentionality. And I really push back against when people are like, my kid's like pooping on purpose to get out of class. No, not he's 6. Like that's insane. But if we think about what the heart and the endocrine system do, like if we just make it about biology, remove intentionality, it's much less stigmatizing. At a macro level, the way I'm approaching this is like I'm going on ABA podcasts, like I'm on Behavior Bitches, I'm on What's New with Catalyte, because these companies and people actually really care. Like, as one of my friends who's a behavior analyst says, very few people go to school to hurt people. So I tend to think they're doing it from a good place, and maybe they just need some nervous system education. So that's the thing you in Chicago can do, though, because you impact a system and a place that's very close to where I am. So the other thing is team up with NIU.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, gee, we're just about at time. Amazing how fast this goes.
Things are quick it goes.
I'm thinking about doing some more around neurodiversity and maybe inviting a panel to come, because I think there was a lot of interest in people signing up. So look for that. Next time we have Gemma Harris Bodden, who's coming to join us. We'll talk about trauma and neglect. I think one of the things, she has a background in working with severe abuse as well. So that should be an interesting one to explore. And you can check her out beforehand as well.
And that's on June 26th.
Yeah, we're booking in now to February. In Dublin, I met Tian Dayton, who many of you probably know as really a important kind of legend in the field of addiction and trauma. She wrote, I think, the first book that was called Trauma and Addiction. She's a psychodrama person, wonderful, very, very gifted person. And she's going to join us I think in January, but meeting all these great people, and then I get to invite them to share them with you. So it's really fun. Okay, so we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate your time always, and also your accessibility. And we know that's one of the things Steve Porges said recently, right? The greatest gift you can give to someone is your accessibility. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and take really good care of yourselves and come and be part of community. I'm doing an author study series on my 2 books, actually, the first and the second one. I think we're starting at the end of July on a Wednesday from 12 to 1:30. Just thought it would be fun to dig in deeper to both of the books and share some of the process around different chapters and some of the information that's not included in the book. There's lots of free things we're doing as well. Take good care, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye-bye.